Hey YouTube, what's going on? Today we're going to do something kind of fun. We're going to take the new NECA, well, I don't know how new it is, but the NECA prototype Big Chap from Alien, and we're going to make it a little bit more Geiger accurate. So we're doing a repaint. Let's check it out.
Behold, my stuff.
All right, this is the NECA Big Chap prototype suit, I guess they're calling it. It's really just the second generation Big Chap mold. You can see it doesn't have swivel joints. It's got fully articulated hip joints. And it was just cast translucent with a wash and a dry brush on it. So it's the exact same mold. You can see it's still got the piece that comes out of the mouth. It's got a really good translucent skull. It's got all the fun bits. It's got the neck spine. But you can tell that coloring wise, they didn't really do a ton with it. They just basically dry brushed over a translucent cast. But it's got all the important big boy details. It's got the Lady Gaga shoes. It's got the 6 fingers, which you do have to have. You have to have the 2 thumbs if you're doing a proper Big Chap. I know some people have made videos about how that's not a thing, but yeah, definitely is. We've got the connected tubes attached to the jaw, and the jaw is mobile, so it is its own piece. It can close and open. It's got these nice silver teeth, which I really do love, and I'm very sad because there's a really good chance I'm going to screw that up. So what we're really going to do is we want to make this more Geiger-esque. Size-wise, let's see, how big is this guy? Stands just a little over 10 inches tall. In order to do what we're going to do, we're going to airbrush on some pearlized black or some gunmetal, and we're going to brush it off. And we're going to try to preserve as much of this paint as we can, as much of the translucency as we can, and we're just going to get some dark in there and make it a little bit more pearlized. Then when it's all done, we're going to do some dry brushing of our own, try to get that really milky, gnarly Geiger color. And then we may frost up our dome a little bit. I may take the dome off in order to do the paint job, but we're going to see. I don't really want to mess with the skull too much, but a little wash will go a long way. I don't want to use an acrylic black because it's too flat. So if I use this, it'll be flat. It's got to be glossy. But worst case scenario, if it doesn't go the way I want, I've got some varnish I can cover it with. But let's see what we do.
All right. So the first brilliant idea I had was to simply airbrush this thing. I thought doing an airbrush would subtly take care of all the coloring I want. Little did I know that I was using such a low airflow, not because of the settings that I had, but ultimately because there was an issue with the connector into the air compressor. So I had to replace that, which helped me out a lot with later projects, but you see me always having to tap it. So that was going to make this take 900,000 hours. So I go through and I try to airbrush basically a pigment black. It is a pearlized black. It's sort of like a gunmetal. It's really just graphite powder mixed with black. Once I figured out that that was not really cutting it for what I wanted to do, but that the effect was coming out the way I wanted, and so when I just figured out, you know what, I'm just going to go ahead and paint the whole damn thing myself with a brush. I did use the airbrush for the dome, for the edges of the dome, because that still needed to be so very subtle. And so the airbrush worked really well for that. There are certain techniques that an airbrush is ideal for, but I find that 90% of what I like to accomplish, I could accomplish with brushes. Giger himself did almost all of his artwork detailing with an airbrush, believe it or not. Those are his wall paintings, his big giant matte paintings and everything. Those were all done with airbrushes for the most part. He would use brushes and things like that to, you know, make the base from the photographs that he would take and whatnot. But at the end of the day, a lot of the grids and the high repeating patterns and things he did that with an airbrush, and that was back in the 70s. So airbrush does seem appropriate if you're going to work on something Giger. But you can see I'm having a little bit of grief with the guy. So pretty soon here, I'm just going to switch over to a brush and start painting the crap out of the thing. And so once I start doing that, I paint generously, and I rub immediately and see what that leaves. Then I'll paint and leave it for a few seconds and let that sit for a minute and then rub and see what I've got. As my cloth became more and more and more saturated, I noticed that the rubbing was having less removal. So sometimes I stick with the very, very paint saturated cloth, and other times I do it completely dry and untouched. And really that was just me feeling out the process. I knew that the tail would end up looking totally fine if it was solid black. So I did a lot of experimenting on the tail, because if I just completely covered that black, I'd be fine with it. So I didn't want to have those errors by the time I got to the body. So that was my big thing. I needed the body to really look the way I wanted. So now that I've started moving on to the legs, I have figured out exactly how I want to do this. And so I'm going to do this in layers. I'm going to paint the crap out of it, remove as much as I can, and let it sit and dry. And then I'm going to go back and build it up and build it up and build it up and build it up. And so we're doing the lower body. We're going through. The hard plastic and the soft plastic actually took the paint very similarly. And I did that with no priming on the figure at all, which was a thing that I was really hesitant about. I was like, do I go in and matte clear coat it? Do I semi-gloss clear coat it? Do I give it some sort of a base to see if this will take? And ultimately what I found was, because there was so little paint on the plastic, it was a raw pull, it did take the airbrush paint very well. So I ended up not priming it, and I did seal it at the end, but it ended up really just staining the plastic, which came out pretty cool. I have seen some people dye. They take their figures, they throw them in boiling water with like RIT dye, or they make a custom ink dye or something like that, and get that sort of black. And that's worked for people. I didn't want to risk that. I do have another kind of throwaway alien warrior figure that I may try that with. And if I can get that to work, I'm all about it. So now we're getting some success here. It looks very, very silver and very gray under the harsh light. I'm using these lights because it really hides nothing from me. And really it's about when you don't do airbrush paint through an airbrush and you just sort of mix it and paint with it, you get patches of goop of silver, some very heavy black. So the more you stir it, the better it is. Get my noodle out of the way. So you're going to see my head a bunch in this, but we're going in and doing a lot of the depth now in the upper body. The neck has a lot of pieces with NECA, a lot of plastic attachments, things that can snap off that you'll have to glue together later, depending on how you're articulating. Also, the head isn't notoriously firm, so painting in there is a little bit of a pain. This is where the airbrush would have probably served me better, but at this point I'd committed to the brush and I wasn't going to reset up the airbrush, so I was just like, screw it, let's go. Because once I finish airbrushing, I tend to stick the airbrush in soapy water and let it sit for the next time that I'm actually able to clean the thing. That was like a hack that I learned online from somebody that actually really panned out well for me. It saved me a lot of needles over the years. So now I'm going in, I'm doing a lot of the detail on the head and going through the spine, and we're just going to keep painting. We're going to keep doing it. We're going to keep going. And I think that I start going over previous layers pretty soon here, but it's a long, tedious process. And I really tried to stay away from having an excessive amount of paint. I didn't want it pooling in places and things like that. I really kind of made sure it was just enough to come off the bristles, and basically just wet brushing. So, you know, dry brushing, it was just wet brushing. It's like wet palette brushing. That was the reason. Like, washes are really good that way. You don't want to have an excessive amount of running and things like that, unless that's exactly what you're going for, like with blood or something like that, where you do want pooling and recesses, slime and things. But the other thing was, when you're painting these figures, I like to hyperextend the joints out and really get into the joints. But I did sort of have foresight and tried to think about what pose I was going to put him in. And so I wanted to make sure that those joints were painted in that moment. Now, the upper arms is a harder plastic. It's hard like the upper thighs, but it has less crevices. And so it takes paint the least. And so that's when you're going to see the shoulders get a lot of layers. but that's where that Giger color can really come through. So if you reference back to Giger's original painting of the Xenomorph, which is not what he called it, that's just Latin for strange form, but that was a Cameron term. But Giger's original painting, where they're like, that, we want that. He was notorious for this greenish, gray, desaturated color scheme. It's all over his Zurovsky Dune material. It's all over the Necronomicon paintings. He worked with a lot of different colors, but he's most known for that look. It heavily inspired The Matrix, that sort of desaturated green, biotech look. And so I very much wanted the color that this thing came in to shine through, because when I add the black to it, it does simulate that look really, really well. And so we're having a lot of fun going in and getting the face done and all that. One mistake that I make is I paint the damn tongue mouth, the protruder. I paint that black, and it totally escaped my mind at the moment because I was so excited that the method was working. I forgot that the Xenomorph Big Chap has a white protrusion, so I had to go back in and deal with that later, which was really frustrating. I was like, I can't believe I did that. I could have just left it alone. But yeah, the feet, getting those in. I'll tell you guys a little bit about the Big Chap build actually in a second, but it's starting to Giger up a little bit. So while I switch back to airbrush for detailing at the end here, parts from Rolls-Royce were used on Giger in the hips and whatnot, in the head. Contraceptives were used for his jaw, for the tendons. Shin bones and jaw bones from animals were on the feet. The back of the elbow bones, those are human collarbones, molded, of course, and then lion vertebrae did the tail. Giger used all sorts of crap on this build. It's really an interesting build. If you have the time, look it up. So, finishing up on the tail, and then we're just about done, and we're about to take a look.
All right, let's take a look. So, we got the light on for this guy. So, really, the airbrush ended up being better for detailing. And what I really ended up doing was just painting it on and then wiping it off and painting it on and wiping it off and letting it dry and painting it on and wiping it off. And so really it's just kind of covered in a black wash. But this, I think, is far more dynamic looking than the previous. Let's turn off the light. So as soon as we kill the spotlight, you can see how much darker everything is. There's going to be a little bit more detailing required. Some areas like the tail got a whole lot more black, but we go in on the face. We got some airbrushed up into the dome. But you can see we dusted up the dome a little bit, making it a little darker. I may go over the dome more. But it did what I wanted it to do, which was just make it a little bit more obnoxious. The coloring does have that sort of look that I was going for. I may need to dry brush some brown into it. Let's get that out of there for a second. So obviously we've got a little bit of touching up for the teeth. Just a little bit more. Probably need just a little bit more on these pieces in the back. I also may go in with some acrylic and deal with that. I don't know yet. I haven't quite decided, but for the most part, this is looking a lot better than the standard prototype figure, I think. Feet came out pretty good. Looks pretty good. So not bad. So that's a wrap on our Big Chap. So he's all done, and he's ready to be put into a diorama. And that's what the next series of videos are going to be. All month long in October, it's Xenomorph themed. So I'm going to have a lot of different videos coming out that are all going to be about the Alien franchise and things that we're doing. So once we've gotten our Big Chap, we're going to stick him into a diorama that contains some of the classic elements, including this custom piece right here,
And that's what my next series of videos are going to be. It's going to be showing you how I made this custom egg that looks more Giger-esque as opposed to the generic avocado that you get with the NECA Alien series. As you know, Cameron redesigned the eggs, and so getting it back to more of a Giger place, I'm going to show you how I did that and how I made a yawn version of it so that I could get the egg in alignment with what I'm going for with my Giger-esque diorama. So check out the future videos. Thank you very, very much for checking out this long build. And remember, if you can't build it, buy it. If you can't buy it, build it. And if you can do both, sometimes you can get something really cool.